Hi everybody, Faculties Justice here with the Philosophy Society. We are in a new room today. Hopefully there are no sound issues like there were before. We have a new person here today. Thank you for coming. And our veteran administrative assistant is here. Thank you for booking the room. It's very nice. Today we're going to talk about value a little bit. That's where I was thinking about going. And we were on this discussion about habits and like a course of action. So we have goals in life, and then we're focusing towards those goals. It's important to understand what we mean when we talk about value. We can value objects as things, right? So there's like, an object, and then we can assign some dollar value to it. And then we can have like non-monetary values, things that mean something to us. They can still be objects of something, but we wouldn't put a price tag on, right? Like a person. And so that's one way we can like observe value, is that there's you in the world, and then there are things out there that have some meaning to you or significance. But then we also have another way to talk about value, which is like a motivational thing, right? It's something that drives us or pushes us towards action, what we're going to do in the future. So, and this motivational component is very internal to the person, like it's in their mind almost. And we can have entire groups of people that all share some similar value. And I guess we could also call it like an orientation towards action, or even disposition. Another way you could say is like the reasons why you did something. Our values, going with the motivational values, the things we believe or the things we live for, they're very close to our beliefs in some ways, right? So you can have like a belief structure and some sort of a hierarchy, right? And the most important belief you'd say is like at the top. And all of these other beliefs, they support this main belief. You can also draw it in a different way. You can have like an inverted hierarchy like this, right? And then the value is the reason for why we do specific actions or tasks. It's important for us to understand what our values are in the context of like priorities. So when someone does something, this is like the action, and the action is because of some value. We want that to make sense. So there's going to be like a reasoning context in this to understand what the nature of our values are. Now, it's important to have a sense of what this hierarchy or priority of values would be. So we have like down to like the nth value, however long they go. And the priority of value, sometimes like we can have universal priorities. So it means like no matter what's going on, this is always the most important thing. Now, in a religious context, God kind of just trumps that. It's usually always the case, right? So someone could say like, well, God is the most important thing, But then there might be situational. We can also bring this and talk about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, situationally, if we're in this room, the value might just be like comfort, like I'm comfortable. And that's just what matters, But if there was like a fire in the building, comfort would immediately kind of just go out to the side. Like now we're not comfortable. As comfy as the chair is, or whatever's going on, the temperature, or how I feel with my body, the fact that there's a fire is directly related to like my safety or the safety of others. So now the situation has changed, therefore the values in the moment have changed as well. And so when I say the values have changed, that means my orientation towards action has changed. So now it's not just like sitting in a chair and like listening or participating with the Philosophy Society. It's like, we need to get the fuck out of the building. We need to get out of here right now, right? And as safe as possible we can. So the priority of value, there might be some interchangeability between them, right? Now, it's important to understand this universal context. What are some universal values we may have? Like, for example, we have like rights and liberties. And we have like the Declaration of Human Rights, right? So that's like a thing. And that would be a social contract or an agreement that people have accepted in a particular place that they're going to uphold. And humans, after thousands of years, have kind of come to a realization in certain areas of the world that these are universal rights for every sentient human being that exists, right? That if you're a human being, you deserve these rights. And then we get into certain conflicts, moral issues, between, like, for example, like the abortion issue. So, pro-choice or life, right? Do the rights apply to the unborn baby, right? Or the rights relative to the woman who's a fully functioning human being. And so there's specific details that would determine whether or not we go from one to the other, right? Do you qualify for these rights or do you not qualify for the rights? And so those are values. And those values, again, go towards the orientation towards action. Depending on how we interpret the rights is going to determine what decisions you make. So this is important, right? And then aside from rights and liberties, we also have ethics. So an individual, and we've talked about ethical principles. So the duty to do good, being beneficent, the duty to not cause harm, like doctors with the Hippocratic Oath, justice, making sure that it's a fair society, that we all have equal chance to succeed and we all follow the same laws. Utilitarianism, right, which would be that the greatest happiness for the greatest number is the best decision. Then we have Immanuel Kant with his duty-based ethics. So don't use people as a means to an end, right? You don't want to exploit people. We want to think, well, what's this person's interest and what would they want? Use them as an end in themselves, right? And then universalizability. Any action that we do, we want to make it do it such that it will apply to everybody, right? And then autonomy, that individuals have the right to make free decisions. So we have these ethical principles, right? Over here, the ones I just listed. And that may guide our orientation towards action in some ways, that we value being ethical. And if we're aware of these principles, we can apply them on specific situations and help us guide our decision-making process, right? And so even from far back from this, like, well, why does it matter to be ethical? You know, like, what's the purpose of this? And there can be how you see yourself as an individual, and then there could be your place within society, right? Like, I am human, therefore, what is my value towards humanity? How, like, you know, and that's what having a conscience is. When you do something that kind of fucks with people, you're like, even if you get away with it, you still feel bad. You're like, no, which is good, because it means you're not a psychopath. That's a good thing. And how we feel about ourselves, you know, it's like, what kind of person do you want to be? What is the meaning of my existence, right? These markers are great. Sorry. Right? The meaning of my existence. So the meaning of my existence, so there's you, right? And then there's the trajectory of your life. And so the meaning of your life is like, where do you fall on this trajectory towards your goal or the outcome? Like, how has your life in total amounted, and what have you done with it? What is the story, right? And then when it comes to the place within society, that's more like, what is my value to the human group? Like, what have I done to help everybody out in some ways? And there's a whole bunch of things that we can do as people, right? So community reflection, like, oh, kids. So this is important, and it comes down to values in some ways. Some people, for example, if you're suffering from depression, that's almost like a lack of value of myself, right? I don't value myself. And so I'm like, why should I even exist? There's no purpose, you know? And part of that can come from how we feel, right? So like value itself is another way of saying self-esteem. And there's evidence to show that when self-esteem goes down, we see people have depression, right? And so there's a way for us to deal with that. And that's going to go back to living a good life and having well-being, right? And that's good. We want everyone to have one sense of well-being, assuming that it's not oriented towards causing harm to others, right? Or exploiting other people. So it's important so we always come back to this point about self-awareness. Now, there's this universal approach towards values, and then maybe some situational, or there are certain factors that will orient our values depending on what's going on. And it might be like, it might be different. Like there's different situations that we're in, and then we kind of cross over to a new domain, and then we progress and we cross over to a new domain. So the values are fluid in some ways, but there's certain things that are just going to be like constant. Like you just don't go over here, and you may approach it from different avenues, like don't end up in jail. That's like an easy one. Or don't get killed, So there's a bunch of no's, right? Jail, being killed, and then other things. There's just certain outcomes where we're like, that's almost probably always bad. Going to war, probably not very good, right? Or like a nuclear war, right? Even though we have all these nuclear weapons, we haven't really used them in a full comprehensive way. The world still exists. Everyone kind of sees it as a universal thing. There may be some threats from Putin and Kim Jong-il in the last 2 weeks about using nuclear weapons. We're all anxious about that. It's not really cool. It's like someone with like a blowtorch saying, I'm gonna burn the building down. We're like in the building. It's like, dude, what are you doing with that? It's not cool. So there's some things we say this is not good, right? Even the criminal doesn't want to go to jail. And they're putting themselves most at risk to go to jail, right? So even though they may disregard some values of like law, right? They don't want to have the value of going to jail. It's usually not a really good thing because your liberties are being taken away. So it's important for us to establish a sense. Did I put self-awareness over here? Yeah. So whenever I'm writing stuff on the board, I'm always putting the higher ordered things, the largest categories at the top, and then smaller categories at the bottom. So self-awareness is something that applies to everything, right? And understanding our priority of value is something that we're going to have to utilize our self-awareness for. And so because we're kind of progressing through situations differently, like I may have an intention to go in this direction, but then some environmental factor happens and then I end up having to go down over here, right? So you may be like, I'm going over here. Like for example, you're coming to the class today, like I'm going to this building, but they didn't know it was going to be this room, right? So like I'm going to this thing and then the way you went in life changed based on some external factor for yourself, right? Whatever that is. As things change in life, I think it's important to begin to think about what is it that is important to me and have some sense of what that is. Because once we start to structure our priority, our values, and have an awareness, so like step one, where's this number over here? Step one is what is important? And then the subheading, like once you start to list what's important, then you say like, what is the order of importance? Or we just talk about priority or ranking the importance of things. And then how does that thing compare to the other things that matter to me? Comparing values, right? I think that's important. And within that, there's going to be like a subheading of like, what does it mean? Or almost like the value of value. So when we look at like well-being, so we put that at the top, right? Even if we believe in God, part of the reason that we believe in God is because we probably think that God is going to make our lives better. If we believe, like, if there was like, I don't know, demons running around, like doing bad stuff, like they're really out there, and you have to like take a shovel with you to protect yourself, right? You would say that's bad because that thing is going to hurt me, right? Just like if you're like out in the savannah and there's a threat of like a lion or a tiger or something like that. You're like, don't watch out for that, it will eat you. It's not good for you, right? We can almost universally say that well-being, the state of the existence of myself in my life, is the most important thing because I'm always experiencing it. I'm always part of my experience. It's always something that I have to face. Unless I'm sleeping, but even if I remember my dreams or I'm semi-lucid, there is still this sense of, is this a pleasant experience or is it like I'm having a nightmare, right? And if we're not doing well, it's like, what do I do about that, right? I'd like to have better dreams, or I'd like to even be able to fall asleep, And so we have well-being. And then there might be instrumental values, things that are important to us that are supposed to get us to well-being. It's almost like subheading A, B, C, D, you know? And so some people, where we find ourselves, for example, engaging in like substances, right? And then there's like substance abuse. So like substance use and abuse. Substance abuse is when the substance takes over and it goes above well-being, right? Because it's actually causing more suffering for the person. And usually the case is because there's a spike in stimulus, but then there's like this withdrawal stage. And then the person, it's very difficult to get through the withdrawal stage. They kind of just stay in this addictive state, right? And there's a whole bunch of addictions that we can talk about, whether it's a substance or it's like being into like porn or video games or whatever. And so the first step is like being aware of the cycle of some other thing going up, actually going above it, because we may not even think it's just happening to us. Right? And so that's why the self-awareness part, as a faculty or something that you can do, is one of the most, like as a value, it's almost like the most important, because it's like a meta thing, right? Self-awareness, another meta thing is reasoning, right? Because it's something that I'm doing to understand the context of all of these other things. And that's why philosophy in itself is useful for us, because it's the thing we use to make sense of all the stuff, right? Even religion. When we want to understand the nature of God, we're really philosophizing about it. Like, what does this thing mean? The belief that in the faith in it, that's a religious category, and people are free to really want that. But to understand the thing, we're using our reasoning, or maybe our experience. We're exploring our experience in some ways. So, okay. What do you guys think? I'm gonna stop for a second, because I'm just rolling with it right now, right? Good? Continue? Okay. So we're zooming on the priority of value, right? Because in the trajectory of our life, we're the life person. You know, there's things that happen that are external, right? That environmental thing, right? You're on a path and you got derailed that way. So that's not in our control, right? If I voted for this person and then this person got elected, I did my part. You know, I chose to vote, or maybe they both kind of suck. And I'm just like not comfortable voting. I'm like, I wish there was some other alternative to say they both shouldn't be the ones who are being nominated, right? But that's not really how democracy works. Unfortunately, it's whatever. So there's things going on here. Or like I recently registered for this death, dying, and bereavement class. The human condition is such that we kind of die. And even if there's an afterlife, those that are alive, we really lose a lot of access to this person that used to be with us, right? And so we got to kind of figure that out, right? What was the meaning of this person to me? And now what do I do that I can't get new experiences from them? I do have memories, and I can like visualize, and they can kind of speak to me in my mind in some ways. You can talk about the spirit, which is kind of a way to discuss it. And they're kind of with you and stuff. You have some experience, like my grandfather, like he's kind of with me. You know, I close my eyes and think about, yeah, he's there. That's cool. But I can't like do new things with him. He's dead. And it sucks. I love the guy. He's like, he loved me a lot, you know, and I appreciate that and I feel it. So in my life, if I was like, I want to go and do this thing with this loved one, I have this thing and this plan, this future-oriented goal, but now I can't do it anymore, you know? And so how is that affecting my state of existence? How is it affecting the meaning of my life and my well-being? What do I do with this? And so there's something to be said about that, right? So the value, there could be like the value for the specific person. And then we can say, well, what is this person bringing to my life? Right? What is the underlying thing? So Simone de Beauvoir is a French existentialist. And one of the things that she brought to philosophy was life sometimes kind of fucks with you. I'm just paraphrasing. In a way that you may have these plans, but they're unachieved or obstructed in some ways. So for example, like Van Gogh wanted to paint and there was a point where he couldn't paint anymore. You know, and so what can you do now? Right? Or if you always wanted to be like a violin player, but then you had an accident, you destroyed your hand or something like that. Right? And so you ask, what is the fundamental value or thing that you're getting out of this experience or this relationship, and how can you fulfill that need without that thing there? Let's say that playing violin gives you a sense of serenity, right? And that, or you feel like you go, like, say, closer to some spiritual state. You say, well, if I can't go this way, so I had one way to get there to X, I can't get there with this route. There's another way I can get to it, right? It's not the same, but I'm still getting to where I want to be, right? And so it's identifying what this state really is, and then finding other ways to achieve it. So for example, people bring certain things to us, right? And so I might lose this specific person, but if I can identify the properties of the relationship, there may be other people in the cosmos that can fulfill that, even though it's not one person. The relationship of all of these people kind of fulfill the needs that this person and one did for me, right? Because some things we can't change. That's just beyond us. But we do have the power to go in the cosmos, and we live in, I would say, a beautiful society. Humans are together. We have to learn to get along a little bit, but there is a lot that the group can provide for us. You can go out there and meet new people, and they can bring things to you, right, that you need as an individual for your well-being to be meaningful. Okay. So the priorities of value, I think it's important that we engage in our self-awareness and we're aware of how our values change over time, because sometimes we may be on a path that's not conducive to our well-being or our growth. And so what we can do is, once we're mindful of what the priority of values are, we can change the direction of our habits and decisions so we can better meet a sound hierarchy of value, right? So this is our hierarchy of value, and it's just not representative, our current path in life. Like if we're going over here and we're ending up not where we want to be, we can reorient ourselves to get where we want to be. And so through self-awareness, we can do that. And being mindful of junctures in our decision-making process, like when we choose to do something, we go this way instead of that way. Again, based on our orientation towards action, which is a function of what our values are. So why am I doing this thing? Because I value X. So me being here right now, engaged with you guys, is because I value the idea that having some kind of a group that all agrees on certain principles, like understanding and having healthy relationships and working towards well-being, utilizing certain skills, and then practicing those skills once a week or so will lead us to a better society. And so my belief in that and my value for that goal is the reason why I'm oriented towards acting in this way, right? Some of them, like, I think about what I want to talk about, and I say it very quickly. And it's like, yeah. All right, so for well-being, yeah, that's one of the things that is important. And there's other things in life that we could say, like when we talk about the good life, right? Like, what does that mean? And we talk about eudaimonia. Aristotle says that to be virtuous is one of the ways that we live a good life, and having a life of contemplation. So situating your life in such a way that you have the time to just sit back and think about things, like you're living a life of peace almost, right? And alternatively, we would add a couple other things to that, right? Like having a mentally healthy life as well, right? So if we get upset about something, we know how to manage it in such a way that we can achieve that goal. So certain things are going to be instrumental for us to get to the well-being, like the self-awareness and the reason. And so what I talk about is like the faculties of the mind. So in some ways, okay, there's like the mind. Okay, there's the mind, the being, and the self. That's kind of like the way that I explain how this works. And the self is one faculty of the mind. That's kind of the way that we express ourselves within the moment and over time. And so there's different ways we can unify or have units of the self. The being is kind of like the thing you are that exists, right? And so faculties of the mind One would be attention. Another would be emotion. There would be self-awareness. What we do is we utilize these faculties to manage all of these other properties, because that's really the thing that separates, or is the link between what we are and what we're in control of and the thing that's out there in the world, right? So there's the individual, mind, and then there's the environment or reality. When we talk about like mental health, it's usually just a property of these things not being oriented in such a way that satisfies the well-being property, right? There's a certain way that we can learn to live utilizing these different faculties, basically what's going on. And so we do that on an individual level and then within the group context. Okay, so basically, when it comes to attention, so we have certain things like ADHD, right? Attention hyperactivity deficit disorder. And so the individual, it's difficult for them to focus on a specific task. Now, on one side, you could say it's neurologically based, that there's like nothing we can really do. We have to give them methamphetamines to mitigate the attentional deficit disorder, or ADD, and that will help them focus better on whatever's going on. The problem with that is that, you know, you're dependent on this substance to mitigate your well-being. And I think it's better for us to utilize some kind of like a Zen meditation practice as much as possible. And hopefully with neuroplasticity, the individual is able to increase their skill at paying attention to certain things. That's one thing, right? So if this is the faculty, the skill would be in meditation. That is the like operationalized thing you can do that will increase your capacity to utilize your your attention skills. The other one would be like, I would say like how to categorize information. So in some ways, if our mind is being distracted to things in the environment, maybe there's an evolutionary reason why. Maybe our brains are structured in such a way to pick out certain information. And if we can learn to categorize that information, then what we can do is we can habituate the external stimulus, and then we can pay attention to things that are going on. And so I've kind of used both of these things myself. And so categorizing data, and then we can habituate stuff, right? And so those are two methods to enhance our attention faculty, I guess in some ways. The emotion stuff, we've talked about that before with David Burns' work, and then not just with David Burns, not just David Burns' work, but also understanding the nature of what our feelings are and our emotions, right? And so I was communicating some emotions earlier today, and I found that like, if you're in some kind of a context where you have a relationship with somebody and you get some feelings, right? If you don't communicate in a healthy way what these feelings are, they can kind of become a barrier in your relationship, right? So there's like one person and then there's the relation between you. And because like, what is the nature of a relationship? I can pause it right here.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to excuse myself.
Yeah.
I need to go, but thank you so much for having me.
Take care. So in a relationship, we have emotions, right? And what a relationship really is almost an identity function between two different people. Sartre talks about object, fancy, this one. What time are we at here? What does he say? Transcendence. Yeah. So what you're doing is the object of the person, you're actually seeing beyond the object some transcendent things going beyond. And so if you have some emotion, that emotion can get in the way of this transcendent process, right? Where you just don't see like the marker, but you see like the idea of a marker. And if you break the marker, or if you have some biased, prejudicial attitude towards the marker, then it can make you feel weird about the marker, right? You don't really see the marker, you're just seeing something else. Or you're not seeing the meaning of whatever it is. So if we don't find a place to integrate the emotion within this connection, then the emotion becomes preventative of you being able to connect with the person, right? part of it can be this nature of a distortion, right? Like you can be distorted in the emotions of place, but even so, there's something to deal with, right? So if you don't deal with the emotions you're having, then you can get angry, right? Or become passive aggressive, right? Or not be motivated to spend time with the person. Yeah. So the way we deal with our emotions is super important, and the distortion understanding is a thing in itself, but there's also more to it when it comes to the self-awareness thing. It's almost like, what actions do we take when we have feelings or emotions? And so that's one of the other factors. So I guess like this is like the value talk, and now we're like on it's like a different chapter, because I finished this one. So, okay, yeah. And then self-awareness, that's very similar to attention. The self-awareness thing is important because it's not just, it's like a meta part of attention, you know, because attention is very like object oriented. It's like, what am I focusing on? But the awareness is like the meaning of the thing, right? Or a sense of mindfulness, like letting things pass by your attention, but it's a more of a meta understanding that these things are going on around you, you know? And so that's important. Sorry, awareness. And then self-awareness is like awareness of myself. I'm sorry, I'm confusing mindfulness with awareness. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is like the meta context of attention. Yeah. And so self-awareness is like awareness of, is obviously awareness of itself, but it's just mindfulness directed towards that person. And so that's where you have your current self-expression, but then there's the existence of the being over time, which is like the whole thing. It's not just how I acted in this one situation, whether it was good or bad. It's my trajectory throughout my life, right? And so that's your being, you know? And so what's important to do is for us to be, so then we have like another faculty, you say reasoning, which we can talk about critical thinking again. And that's how we're using language in the mind to process certain kinds of data. Does it make sense, right? And how is that reasoning supported in some ways? We talk about that. And so, yeah, okay. And so, yeah, we talked about the faculties in mind before, like several times. And really, it's just, there's a limitation. There's only so many things that the mind can really do. Like another one would be like memory. Right? Like how do and memory has certain things. There's like, there's recall, there's like processing, recall / retrieval, and then there's like organizing. Right? There's how I process a thing, there's how I organize the information, and there's how I access the information, right? And so memory is going to be directly linked towards our attention. If you don't pay attention to a thing, then you're not even processing, you're not even inputting it into your memory in the first place. Sorry, and then you can't access it. So when you talk about like studying for an exam or a test, right? It's you can't recall or know what the answer is if you didn't pay attention to it in the first place at all, right? And so to know anything is to put it in mind in some way, right? And it's like obviously like saved in the brain, or which is fine. So like, for example, like people will experience PTSD, they'll have like a flashback. And that's like the memory, like not functioning correctly for that individual. Why? Because they're not able to function in the moment, right? And so,
How do you call it?
PTSD or flashbacks, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then a flashback is when there's like an intrusive memory, like they're reliving the situation, right? Like being trapped under the car. And then they can start to hyperventilate, they can dissociate. And so, like it can be difficult for someone that's within a car accident to drive again.
Yeah.
Right? So like if they, you know, if a fire truck passes them when they're on the road, they can freeze up, right? And that could be unsafe for them to drive, right? So part of this would be like, without them being in control, the memory, the intrusive part of the memory is coming back to mind, right? And so what do they do about that? You know what I mean? Because they kind of lose control. So we would want to exercise mindfulness. That's one way we can approach a way to deal with it, is be aware of the memory without attaching ourselves to it and letting it pass by, right? But then the other thing too is like, how do we organize this event in our lives? What is the meaning of it and how do we perceive it, right? I think perception is almost something we could put in here too.
What if this memory just chasing you?
Mhm.
You can't get rid of it.
So we have to find a place for it, right? Like if it's part of if it's something that's occurred in the being and you can't get it out, then we have to find a way to integrate it so that it's healthy, right? Because sometimes negative things do happen, right? There's some external environmental factor that deviates us off course, but that's part of what it means to kind of exist. And so it's not contingent on who you are in the same way as if it was something that you ascribe to your identity. Like me being a singer is a different thing than me being from Thunder Bay, because I had no choice in being from Thunder Bay. Now, some people would argue, well, you didn't have a choice in being a singer too. You were kind of determined to go that way. But, you know, like I did have the active decision-making faculty to orient my life in that direction, where I could have not. I could have just stuck with guitar, for example, or other things in life. But the thing like where I was born or what my ethnicity was is completely out of my capacity for decision-making, right? I can't do that. I can't change that at all. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's important to understand what the faculties are, because these are the tools we use to kind of drive the ship of being human. And when we're observing where our priorities of values are, what's important to us, within specific situations, there's only so many things that we can really do that are going to increase our control, so we can shift to another area. And so the other one would be like habits. I guess the group's name we can use first. Habits and behavior, and then decisions and actions. And so each of these, and some of them are a little different, like attention is a very like almost concrete faculty, whereas decisions and like habits are a little bit more fluid. There's more really going on with that than me just staring at a dot, right? Or me being taken away from staring at a dot, listening to somebody. If I keep on thinking about something else or having to look at my phone, right? That's a different thing than, like there is a mini habit there in looking at phones and stuff like that. Like there's habits of attention. But I mean like more like large scale behavior habits, like micro and macro. I think it's important to have a sense of value, because last time I talked about values, but I wanted to expand the discussion of values a bit more and kind of go into it. Because the other thing too is value and belief are very similar in the sense that we have certain beliefs that are connected together with other premises or statements, and they support the belief in some other concluding belief or major value. Like the reason I believe in, or the reason I have this value is because I believe it will get me to this end, right? The reason I believe that exercising a little bit every day is important is because it satisfies another belief that will make me healthier and increase other things in my life, like my sexual attractiveness, or my partner finds me attractive in some reason. I feel good about myself, and those things are valuable to me, so I put effort into it, right? So our belief system is really much tied to the priority of values, because it's the reasons why I do it. It's like the justification from that orientation toward action, right? If I have some other understanding of like attention, or if I don't have a sense of control, then I may not even try to do some of these things, right? Because I'm like, well, you don't have control. Like it's very deterministic. There's nothing you can do about it. You know, like some people recently said, well, why do you even, there's nothing you can do about depression. CBT doesn't really even work that well. And my response to that is, well, how effective has the individual's effort to rule out distorted thinking again, right? Like, do you think just in a distorted way, you know? And do you make decisions that are good for you? Because if somebody says that CBT doesn't work, it's like, do they mean that like the conversation with the therapist, that social context doesn't work? Or is it that the theoretical paradigm that it's really just the way you're looking at the world and your behavior that's correlated with how you're feeling about things? Whether somebody else tells you to do it or you learn to do it yourself is almost irrelevant. Maybe some people can't hear it from other people and they're just like, have a fuck you attitude, like, I don't care what you say to me, like the narcissist, you know? But I would almost say that they can probably go through some sort of internal CBT for themselves. Like, I've observed people that display narcissistic traits and they do change their own beliefs on their own terms and they change their own behavior on their own terms. And then I think they would get a report like, hey, I feel better after I did these things. I think that's where the scientific principle. So in the reasoning, we have our critical thinking, and then there's the scientific reasoning or scientific principles thing. And we have the falsification principle, where when I have two competing theories, which one can we prove wrong? And to falsify the CBT thesis is to say, well, have you actually tried the things? Because if you choose not to implement it, you're just not testing it. It doesn't mean the theory doesn't work, it just means you haven't actually done it, right? And so that's not disproving the theory if you don't even test it out. You have to actually test it and see what happens. So, yeah, and I guess the next thing, so once we talk about value, and we have a sense of what our values are and how our values affect us and where it takes us, right? Like what is the function of value for us? Because it really just structures your whole life, what you value. It's the whole thing. Some people don't value education. So as soon as they can say goodbye to ever having to go to school, they do. Other people see a value in education. They like even though there's problems with bureaucracy, they like the context of learning. It's a healthy thing for them, right? And, you know, I've spent a lot of time in school and have not made money while in school, right? Whereas somebody else, they went into specific kinds of jobs. Some people have been entrepreneurs and very successful. Others have went into lower end income jobs, but they still made money, right? And they learned a way to grow in that way. So you end up in very different places depending on what your values are for things, right? So the other thing you could say is that value can be associative, right? Is that if I have an experience with something and if it makes me feel good or bad, I ascribe the feeling to the thing, right? Associative based on feeling. So I determine the value of the thing just on how it makes me feel. Or if you like eat ice cream and you get sick, you're lactose intolerant, I don't value ice cream anymore, right? This is another big sure of it. And so I think that's an important thing to talk about too, is like value, how are values established, you know? And yeah, so then we get to the other point, sorry to interrupt this, is socialization. So, just turn it a little bit. Okay, so the question would be, how are values established? Right? And so from an individual perspective, we could say it's based on feeling, that's one way, or your experience. But then there's a group.
Environment you live in.
Yeah, your environment. Within groups, it would be the approval / disapproval of others, right? Mm-hmm. And so people can reinforce us. This is good, behave this way, or this is not good, don't behave that way. And then some people, you know, like the psychopath, they're like, do not respond to this. The group's approval or disapproval. They're like, I don't care what you guys fucking think, I'm doing what I think is the best. And you know, psychology, that may be like one trait. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing. Like some geniuses, like Einstein, have disregarded what the current theories are of the time, and they have chosen to do their own thing because they thought it was right. or even Elon Musk. I'm not saying they're psychopaths, but just the trait of not conforming to what other people think, right? Elon Musk has done what he thought is correct, and you can even see it in the way that he's reasoning. He's like, yeah, that's the right answer. And then he does it, and then he gets resistance from people. And he's like, but this is the correct answer. And he just spends all his time convincing them. He's like, this is not the correct way to do it. We should have more than one planet we live on. Because if Earth blows up, then we're extinct. And you're like, yeah, okay. That makes sense, right? People will say, but people are starving on Earth. Shouldn't we take care of that? You would say, yes, we should. But we should spend a little bit of our GDP, our gross domestic product, a little bit of our money on living beyond Earth. That way we can survive as a species. So we breach the threshold of the Fermi paradox, where if you don't have more than one planet that you live on, you're most likely going to become extinct, right? He says it's lame. It's lame to only have one planet to be living on. So values can be established this way, right? Individually, through our environment or what we experience, how our environment makes us feel, right? How other people make us feel and what we're doing in the context. And then within a group context, this behavior is good, bad, do these things, right? So conformity. You could talk about obedience too. Other thing. And so, yeah, it's important to have a sense of that establishment of values. And so once we understand how these values are established in some ways, part of it is like a conditioning thing, like how we're conditioned from a behavioristic perspective. But once we have these values, again, there's the if we want to change them, right? Like, how do I change my value? So I think it's important to one, ask what is the meaning of it, of the value itself, right? And then what does it function? Like, what does it do? Like, its function. So for example, someone smokes cigarettes. They like smoking. They value it, right? The object has value and then it does something for them. And so it's like, well, if the function is to reduce stress, are there other stress reducing things you can do so you can switch it out, right? For example, or like drinking alcohol, whatever it is. Whatever the person has learned to do to get to some end state, is there an alternative pathway that they can take, right? And so, yeah. And then find like an alternative, right? That's not as harming or whatever things. Okay, so once we understand value, how value is created, what the function of value is, what the hierarchy of value is, right? And then the next step is really that our beliefs and how we perceive the world are kind of instrumental in constructing the structure of values we have. Where has this belief been derived from, right? And as soon as we get into that territory, now we're just talking about critical thinking, right? The analysis and evaluation of claims, beliefs, evidence, right? Theories, and how do we structure our beliefs or observe some form of reasoning such that it does make sense. That's one thing, like the belief on its own, but then there's the experience of the individual, you know? Like, what is the individual experiencing? What feelings are they having? And what is the meaning of that? I think those two things together are, if we can figure out a way to put those together, that's the most important thing. Because then you can structure your values in such a way that they make the most sense for you. And then you can find a way to live your life to execute or to fulfill those values relative to the goals that are best for you. Right? So I think next week we'll talk about belief.
Is the spirit something that we believe?
Sorry?
Is the spirit something that we believe in?
Yeah, but for me, this is great. So the spirit. So we talk about the spirit, sure. So in the faculties of the mind, we go, what about the spirit? Right? Like in this map, there's the being, there's the mind, and then there's the self.
Yeah.
Where is the spirit? Where is that? So in Hegel has a book called The Phenomenology of the Spirit. And when you translate it, it really just means the mind.
Oh, I thought self.
Right? But it could be like, it could be really just a combination of all of them. You could just say there's a loose way that all of these things are your spirit, or they're just the being.
Yeah.
Right? It's just that the word spirit is kind of associated with like a ghost-like figure. Like there are spirits in the house, or you're drinking spirits, you know? And that is, I want to distance myself from that, right? That's why I say mind, self, and being. Because I can kind of operationalize that, meaning I can measure it in some ways. So you can say like, well, how do you measure being? Well, the physical person being alive is one property. And then there's like direct being and then like maybe indirect. And then all of the referencing from humanity and the effect of in the environment is part of that person's being, you know? Like just their direct existence in the cosmos, you know? Like when I go like this, that little thing was my being, you know what I mean? And we can talk evidence of it, like this being was here, you know? And then the mind is, that's in the individual that's existing, it's the faculties that are like operating, right? And all together, that's like itself. You know, the self is like the expression of the being in the moment. And there's going to be like a variance of expression. And the personality is like the expressions that occur most often over time. I think there's certain conditions, like I become more neurotic when I'm more stressed out, when I have more things going on in my life. And so for me to regulate my personality so I don't express myself more neurotically, like I get irritated and upset about mundane things in my environment, I'm more calm. It's about me managing how I make decisions so that I don't put too much stuff on my plate, right? I think there's some more philosophizing, like conceptual analysis I can do on these three properties of being, self, and mind. But I think that's the right direction to go in, because you use the mind to regulate the expression of self. And we can talk about mental illness as poor self-expression. Like there's a lot of utility in this way after I kind of work out some conceptual clarity issues. And being is really just the thing that exists, right? And the impact of its existence. And there are different beings, you know, and each being has a range of self-expression that it engages in. Like when you're like, I wish I didn't act that way. That's basically saying like, I wish that I didn't have that self-expression. And we can look at, well, why did you act that way? You know, like I've done some things, and I'm like, I don't like the consequences of that, you know? And so why did that happen? Well, the situation I was in, a lot of people would have been like upset with whatever happened there. So don't put yourself in that situation. And so the mind has to know when to navigate to go this way or that way, right? Because if you get into like the dead zone, it's like the probability of bad things happening are just super high. It's almost inevitable. Eventually it's just gonna happen. It's like Russian roulette with like 3 chambers. And there's like a bullet, so you have like a 30% chance of fucking shoot yourself, you know? And so that's part of being wise. It's like knowing what our own limitations are as people. And that goes back to the know thyself thing, right? So when I know my limitations, I want to be able to make decisions in the moment that are going to direct me so that I don't overwhelm myself, so I don't have expressions of self that I'm not willing to accept, right? Like some people, they have a value for family, no matter what. But then they're involved in a family that's like abusive to them. And then they have all of these other weird things that occur in their lives that they're just like, I wish these things didn't happen. Like, I wish I could sleep, or I wish I didn't have to smoke, or I wish that like I had a girlfriend or something like that. And then, for example, I was speaking to somebody recently and they were talking about something that was going on in their life with a family member. And I'm like, you know, like, it's going to be hard for you to get a partner because you're so overwhelmed with your personal issues with your family that you're going to eventually have to talk about it with them. Like you can't expect, do you really expect yourself to withhold how you're feeling? Because it's understandable that you're stressed out. I get it completely. Like it would upset me too, right? But your inability to change the environment that you're in and allowing yourself to suffer through this means that you necessarily have to vent it out somehow, right? And when you think about courtship in like a relationship, like when a relationship is new, you want to show the best of yourself in that relationship and make the transactional exchange between them, like how they feel, always positive, so that your value, right, the individual association with you is a good one. But if your relationship with yourself, if you're feeling bad very frequently throughout the day because of some other relationship in your life, then right here, right? Then basically when you have another person come in your life, all of this stuff, you're just bringing that to them now. And then they're just gonna, they can't really see you for you because all they see you is through all this negativity. And that's going to reduce your value, right? So sometimes it's hard. Like if you're counting with somebody and it's like they value having an intimate relationship, you know, like I have this goal. But then the other value, this is the part of the problem, is competing values. The other value of like being there for my family, right, almost takes more priority. But are you really getting more well-being from that? You know, like, are you? I know that you're fulfilling this principle of like, be part of my family and be there for them no matter what, but at what cost? You know, are you going to be able to have children? Are you going to be able to have like a long-term partner? Well, as long as that's going on in your life, it's like a super low probability that it's going to happen. Yeah, I think that competing values, like what is the nature of like a competing value, right? What does that mean? And then it would be a value for a partner or duty to family. So a good example in the Bhagavad Gita, which is like a Hindu text, is Arjuna's moral dilemma. And Arjuna was like a prince or something like that, or king maybe. And Arjuna had his cousins that were trying to take over some territory or whatever. And he was a warrior. And so he had a duty to like defend the people. But he also had a duty to his family to not kill his family members. And he had a discussion with with Krishna, appeared to him on his chariot. And he's like, your duty as a warrior is a higher value than your duty to your family. Right? And so he ended up going to war and killing the other guys. And so we have to have some way. That's why I said that the priority of value is important. Right? I give the example of substance abuse as a thing, but this is another example of the duty to the partner, duty to the family, right? Or Arjuna. So be a warrior or family, right? And part of it goes back to that universal value, I guess you could say, of like, you have to have a value for the self. That's almost fundamental. Like, when I say self here, I don't mean self-expression. I mean your being. I'm just not called self. Right? That's what I'm saying. There's some conceptual ambiguity here, so I have to kind of like make sure I clarify. So, self versus other. It's important to value the self, not in the sense of being selfish, which means that I'm like stealing from others and taking from others, like the psychopath problem. This guy. Really what you mean is like self-preservation and a duty to your own well-being, that you prioritize loving yourself over loving the other, really. But it doesn't mean that you're harming the other. It's not one or the other. It's not like if I love myself, I'm necessarily harming the other. That's like a scarcity mindset. That's not what we're talking about. We're just saying that you have a duty to take care of yourself as an autonomous being. Autonomous being, to take care of yourself. If that is the case, you know, like I think people especially people that are like have certain traits of psychopathology, they just don't see how helping anybody else is important, right? And there is like the collective self, like we all are selves, and being good to other people is also being good to you, right? But there's almost like a cost benefit. It cost benefit in some ways, yeah. Like sometimes it is important for you to help other people, you know, but there is a limit if it starts to cause harm to you. And sometimes if it's super extreme, you can You can still help other people if it's a little harmful to you, but you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to be exploited. You don't want people to take advantage of you. You know what I mean? Like you fundamentally, if you do it too much, you'll notice that your well-being will start to go down. You're not taking care of yourself, right? And so in the value for the partner, having a partner in the person's life, that is because they would extract a lot of well-being from that, right? They'll get a lot of well-being from having this partner. And the duty to the family, there may be some, if the person is being used as a means to an end, which is one of the ethical violations, that's not really good, you know, because their value to the family would be higher if their self-worth was higher, which is not just how they look at themselves, but also just how their life is situated, right? And so I think that's a great example to talk about there. Because a big part of the value issue is, like, you can conceptually understand and talk about what the priority of values are, but fundamentally, like, we have to value ourselves because that is what I am. Like, there is an a priori acceptance that I exist. Like we could talk about Descartes' cogito. I think, therefore I think I exist. Just me thinking is enough to establish my existence. Me exist is evidence of thinking, which is evidence of me existing, right? In some form or another, because I am in control of it. Exist, I exist. You know, it's like, and so.
Is there a difference between I exist and I believe?
Believe is the assertion of some statement.
No, not believe, believe.
Leave?
Just leave it alone.
Oh, well, you wouldn't be able to think it. You could like have like a plan to like kill yourself or something like that, or like knowing that you're going to die very soon. But that's different than the state of existing. There's the state of existing, and then there's like a statement that's correlated with that state, right? Whereas you can't have a statement when you don't exist, because your existence is necessary for the statement to even be produced.
Right.
And there's some certain apparatus of the brain, like if you get certain brain damage, you won't even be able to make the statement even though you exist. Really, the whole important thing is how do we structure our values, and what do we do to switch them or make decisions that are in our best interest that we don't have any experience with. Because I might just have an experience of always being obedient to my family, but it's not good for me. And I am depressed, but it's because of the situation of my life. And so for me to change things, right, I'm making the assumption that if you're aware of it, maybe I'm wrong with this, but if you're aware of it, then you can make a decision to change, even though it doesn't feel good, because it's unfamiliar. And then it's compromising, like it's like value. It used to be valued 1 and put it to 3, and we're like saying, I'm not going to value that right now. I'm going to prioritize this. And so what psychologically does it take for a person to make that move? Because that assessment of value, this is what it is. Evaluation of value, this is like whether it's good or bad, right? And then a decision based on that. Like identify what's going on, determine its merit, and then do something about it. And so there might be stages where the person has to like go through it. They're like, okay, I'm accepting this is what it is. I'm prepared to do it. Now I've done it. It's uncomfortable. They may relapse, right? And then so what's the you know, what are the stages of change here? There's a 5 stages of behavioral change. But yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say here. That's the whole point of this like chapter, basically, is to give people the conceptual analysis to have the ability to be aware of their own life, like understand how values are created, you know, what are values, what is the faculty of the mind, what do I use to understand it, and then when is it a problem? And that's when it's a problem, because when I value this thing, and I think that that's going to get me well-being, I'm actually not correct about that. I may be incorrect from a philosophical level, like the language of the statements or the critical thinking is wrong, but I may be incorrect empirically. When you really look at it, how happy are you? And the problem is that, like, if you have 2 alternative things, there's A and B, You have no experience of B, but you have a lot of data for A, and it's very negative. It's like -7. If you had a B plus 80, but you just don't know because you've never done it, right? So how can you tell a person this is how good it feels? It's just, like again, I guess they can observe slightly indirectly. You say, did you see how happy that couple is there? Do you want that? And they're like, yes, I want it. Right? Okay. This is what's preventing you. And so there may be moments in the belief system where they're unwilling to accept this premise, like premise 4 or whatever. They're like, that's not true, right? And so as you're communicating different properties, it's like you may get some resistance, but really you need to shift them over to a coherent belief system. So like, okay, I understand the structure of my values, how this specific orientation of value isn't helping me out. And then I need to be able to change these things in my life to achieve this other value structure so I can be happy, right? Because I've always been in this relationship, it's the only thing I know. Okay, I got that. I understand that that's what you have, but there may be a better life for you wherever you are, right? Or there's some way to change your life in the context that it exists. And it's difficult because like, part of it is the motivational thing too. It's like, what's going to motivate a person to shift all these things? And there's like a push and pull with motivation, right? If we see some goal in the future or something we want to gain, we can be motivated towards that thing. I'm being pushed towards this future state or pulled towards this future state. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's good to say. That's what I want to talk about. It's the nature of value. What do we value and how do we structure our lives so that we can have the best life? Because that's what the good life really comes down to. But understanding value is super important. And knowing how we assign value to things, what our priorities of value are, and then the most important thing is how do we do this shifting of our lives based on an accurate, realistic assessment of what the value is. So there's the evaluation process, right? And people might be a little delusional. They might just say things to themselves, or like Freudian self-defense mechanisms. They maybe have some denial about the real state of things, right? And maybe through some social relationship, they can come to some acceptance. They can say, okay, I accept that. And then there would be like a specific structuring of how to like shift their lives. And I guess at some point you have to just say, hey man, this is your life. You need to be responsible for it. If you fuck it up, that's up to you, but you have the power and we care about you. We want you to live a good life, but if you're not going to change anything, there's nothing we can do for you because you're the only one that can do it. And that's great. That's very important. It's empowering. Our autonomy is almost equivalent to our consciousness. It is, in some ways it is. It's rooted in that. Like your own personal awareness and control over your existence, you know? And so from that place, that's where you can create the best life for yourself possible. All right, everybody. See you next time.